She was this gun-toting, whiskey-drinking broad.
The super epic fucking broad.
She was a pioneer in the industry.
She's also so famous and so controversial.
So controversial.
So she's kind of a big fucking deal.
Her story is so incredible. She belongs on this podcast because she's a broad you should know. Hello and welcome to Broads You Should Know, the podcast about amazing and noteworthy women from history. I am your host, Sarah Gorski, and we are in the middle of February right now in the United States, which means it is Black History Month. And I'm not going to lie to you, this is one of my favorite months to celebrate, especially on this podcast. Black women are, generally speaking, one of the most underappreciated groups of women in the history books. Speaking from my own upbringing, which is really all I can ever speak to, the history books that we read in public school in the predominantly white suburb that I grew up in mentioned very few Black women. I feel like I can name them on probably one hand. We have like Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King, and Maya Angelou, definitely. And I think that might be it, or that's all that I can remember from growing up. And a person who wouldn't think to dig any further than that would just kind of assume, or might assume, rather, that Black women were prevented from doing great things in history. But if you are a longtime listener of this podcast, you already know what I'm about to say. That is 100% not true. As we well know, Black women have done so many amazing things in history, despite all of their many challenges. Their lack of presence in the textbooks is because white men were writing all of the textbooks for a really, really long time. And today's broad is no exception. In fact, today's broad is an inventor, and her patent literally laid the foundation for one of the greatest creature comforts we enjoy as human beings in the 21st century. Can you guess what it is? Central heating. That's right, a Black broad invented central heating, the foundation of what would become the HVAC system. Since a lot of the country right now is still shivering in the winter temps. And yes, actually, for the record, we do shiver here in LA too. It seemed, since everybody's shivering, like it's a great time to talk about the amazing Alice H. Parker. I'm saying Alice H. Parker, by the way, because there is a famous opera singer apparently also named Alice Parker. So if you go and Google her, use that H or central heat to the search bar, and you'll probably land on the wrong page if you don't add that little H. Alice H. Parker. She is widely credited as being the inventor of the first gas furnace, which she filed for a patent for in July 1918 and was finally awarded in December 23rd, 1919. By the way, the dates in Alice's story, those dates seem the most correct. Some of them said she filed it in 1919. Some said she won it in 1919, but more of them said that the patent finally was awarded in December 2023. All the sources for her are kind of all over the place with Alice. And truly very little is actually known about her and her life outside of this invention. And I find it super infuriating, and yet another example of Black women getting shuffled to the back of the news cycle. Because we're not talking about 60 AD when pretty much only monks and kings and queens and disciples apparently could read and write things down. This is the early 1900s when Alice invented her heating system. Newspapers and books were widely available. It's just nobody bothered to write about Alice. There was one announcement in a newspaper announcing that her patent had been awarded. I think in some obscure newspaper in Seattle, I feel like is what I recall from research. So Alice was not actually the first Black woman to receive a patent. In fact, we have covered that broad on this podcast already. You might remember the episode we did on Sarah Good. It was one of Chloe's episodes. She invented the folding cabinet bed, kind of the precursor to the trundle bed, if you will. And she invented that in 1885. However, in my research for this episode, I found out that that actually isn't true either. There was one Black broad before her who got a patent, Judy Reed. And Judy Reed invented a dough kneading machine in 1880. Can you believe that we were wrong on this podcast, Chloe? I know you listen, Chloe. We really messed up, I guess, on that episode. Yikes. I blush automatically when I'm wrong about something or when we're wrong about something, but it happens because let's talk about it for a second. It's always worth mentioning so many articles out there that we read are not actually sourced very well. And you have to be really careful, and sometimes mistakes are made. And in fact, now is a good time to mention that this one takes the cake. If you Google Alice H. Parker, some of the articles about her literally have a photo of her attached to the article that is literally not her. It's some British white lady born like 5 years after her patent was granted. And I'm not talking about one article, I'm talking about more than one article. So that means that one dumbass posted the wrong picture without checking to make sure if it was accurate, if it was really Alice H. Parker, and then a bunch of other idiots copied the first idiot and his article, and now people think that a British white lady is Alice. It's like so ridiculous you couldn't write it. I did, however, by the way, find what I believe to be the accurate photo of her. I have that posted on the website, as always, broadsyoushouldknow.com. But back to the story at hand. Alice was living with her family in Morristown, New Jersey. This is in the early 1900s, around 1910. And this was about, Morristown, New Jersey is about 40 miles west of New York. And for anyone who's been to the Northeast in the winter, those winters are not, they're not a joke. They're kind of nasty. It was cold as hell and sub-zero temperatures sometimes. And despite a lot of other great inventions throughout time, apparently heating systems had developed very little since the time of ancient Rome, the Roman Empire. And then there was, Koreans invented heated floors about 1,000 years before Alice's story. But other than that, people were still lighting fires or burning coal in stoves indoors. And that was like your basic heating. And each room, if you had a house, if you had more than one room, and if you wanted the other rooms heated, you had to have a fireplace or a stove in those rooms. And it was a lot of fuel to be burning. And also it was a huge fire hazard. Lots of houses burned down, including all of Chicago. Chicago burned down. Huge liability, these inside stoves and fireplaces. So Alice apparently was working as a cook at the time, and her husband was a butler. And funds were tight, and coal is expensive, and they were still cold all the time in most of their house. So Alice gets to thinking about how she could create a new heating system that could heat more than one room and use less fuel, and something that was safer than the fire and the coal. And she invents, quote, a comparatively simple, reliable, and efficient heating furnace in which gas is employed for the fuel, whereby economy of labor and fuel cost is effected and greater flexibility in the operation obtained, end quote. That was the description of her invention on the patent. And it was basically a natural gas powered heating system. And it contained individually controlled air ducts that would distribute the heat throughout the building wherever the air ducts reached. Per her official patent, quote, heat circulates from the primary burner into the secondary heating tools, eventually heating the intended centralized area where the air and vent ducts are placed within the intended space, end quote. Her heating system used these individually controlled burner units, and it would draw in cold air and then convey the heat through a heat exchanger. And the air would then go through the individual ducts. And you could control the amount of heat that goes to each of those individual areas. And today, this is what is known as, quote, zone heating, where the temperature can be set to individual parts of the building. That's a term from today, and that is the technology that she invented. And sadly, even though zone heating, that technology, it would literally become the future and the standard of modern heating. It was the precursor, the beginning of HVAC. But at the time, her own invention did not actually achieve great success. Apparently, it sounds like in the articles I read, there were a number of hazards that made it too unsafe for a wider use for the general population. Some of the parts of it got really hot. The oven got really hot. So she did not see great success from that or great notoriety from that because her actual invention just didn't go wide. Now, I haven't talked much about Alice's life because there's really very little information out there on her. She was thought to have been born in 1895, and she graduated with honors in 1910 from Howard University Academy. Not Howard University, but like the prep school for Howard University. And it's thought that her studies were focused on STEM and engineering, but we don't know that for sure. And also, it's high school. I feel like people don't usually focus their studies in high school. And by the way, not many women, we should say this, not many women were attending Howard University at the time. The first black woman admitted at Howard was only in 1884. So that's like 20 years before she was there, before Alice was there. And of course, I'm not even talking about Howard University, really, because Alice's school was the prep school for Howard University, so high school level. And while I did mention that she was a cook and her hubby was a butler, we only know those things from census data, actually. They don't even know the specific date of her death, but it is thought that she died in 1920 due either to a fire or heat stroke. And I was not able to trace those sources back further. It seems like like a big mystery. Alice is a huge mystery. But her invention, the foundation of her invention lives on, and she has posthumously been recognized quite a bit. The National Society of Black Physicists honored Alice as a, quote, African-American inventor famous for her patented system of central heating using natural gas, end quote. And they called her invention, quote, a revolutionary idea for the 1920s that conserved energy and paved the way for central heating systems. Also, the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce established the Alice H. Parker Women Leaders in Innovation Award to honor women who use their, quote, talent, hard work, and outside-the-box thinking to create economic opportunities and help make New Jersey a better place to live and work. And also in 2014, the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce named Alice one of the state's 25 greatest greatest innovators. She was only one of 5 women to make that list. 5 of 25. 20%. And of course, now her legacy can also live on in you every time you turn on your thermostat. To learn more about Alice H. Parker, see that picture of her, the accurate picture, and quotes from this episode, head on over to broadsyoushouldknow.com. While you're there, you can click on over to the About page and read more about me, my bio, photo, links to my stuff, all right there. Are you following Broads You Should Know on social? We are on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube at Broads You Should Know and Twitter at BYSK Podcast. To suggest a broad, fill out the form on our website or email us at broadsyoushouldknow@gmail.com. If you're a fan of this podcast, if you want us to grow, help us by spreading the word and sharing an episode with your friends and family, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps new listeners to find us. Broads You Should Know is produced by me, Sarah Gorski, and edited by Chloe Skye, with original music by Darren Callahan. Finally, if you really enjoyed hearing this little story about Alice H. Parker, then I highly recommend you check out a few of our previous Black Broad inventors. We've got Sarah Good, the inventor of the folding cabinet bed, Madam C.J. Walker, who patented hair care products and became the first Black millionaire in the U.S., and Mary Beatrice Davidson Kenner, who invented the sanitary napkin, amongst many other things. See you next week for another Broad You Should Know.